Joining us now for more on this is Ben Anderson. He's a journalist and the author of No Worse Enemy. Ben, thanks for joining us. You predicted a lot of what we're seeing today in your book, No Worse Enemy. I'm going to read for our viewers something that you wrote. Quote, in huge swaths of the country, the government will not stand for 24 hours, much less 3 years without foreign support. Every Afghan I have spoken to is convinced there will be another round of civil war as soon as we leave, with no rules of engagement or courageous restraint. Your book was published in 2011. How did so many politicians, policymakers, and top military officials miss what you plainly said back then?
I mean, honestly, I don't think they missed it. Certainly people who had spent time on the ground knew that the effort to create an Afghan government and security forces that could stand up on its own was doomed. And after the Obama surge of 2010, nothing was really done to address that problem. And actually, there were huge efforts by those at the very top just to do PR and just say, the Taliban are almost finished. The latest attack is a sign of their desperation, and that the Afghan security forces and government are very close to being able to stand up on their own 2 feet. And, that PR felt like it was the most important thing. I know Marines who did exceptional things trying to stamp out corruption, child abuse, drug abuse, and they were silenced and their careers ruined for it. So I think it was known. I think they weren't willing to admit it. And the only reason we're in the situation we're in today is that, Obama knew if he pulled out, this is what was going to happen, and he wasn't prepared to have that happen on his watch. Trump knew if he pulled out, this is what was going to happen, and same thing. And I think Biden has just said, look, we can wait another 5, 10, 15, 20 years, but the same thing is going to happen. And I don't think that's on the Afghans, that's on us, because we're responsible for the leadership, which is what dictates the will of the fighting men underneath those leaders. And, in the rush to get to Iraq, we brought in some of the most hated and feared and corrupt leaders from Afghanistan's pre-Taliban history.
So much of what I'm hearing from you, Ben, is that ultimately, given what we were doing over there, this outcome was inevitability. But you did mention that among the messages that we received were about the security forces in Afghanistan. So what happened to the Afghan military?
I mean, my first journey out with the Afghan military was the summer of 2007. It was clear they weren't well trained. Many were illiterate. Many were from the north and didn't even speak the language of the south and the east, which makes winning hearts and minds and gathering intelligence impossible. But I know lots of Afghan soldiers that have unbelievable will to fight, unbelievable toughness, dedication, energy. Some of them have already moved to the Panjshir Valley to join the resistance. They just weren't willing to fight for leaders and bosses who they saw as just lining their own pockets. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Sangin, in Helmand province, where to be a district police chief, you had to pay something like $40,000 to get that position. So then, of course, you're not interested in looking after your men, making sure they're well supplied or well fed. You're not interested in doing your job and protecting the local civilians. You're interested in getting a return on your investment. And that was clearly what they were motivated by doing. And the men underneath corrupt leaders like that, aren't of course going to be willing to fight and die for those men. So as soon as the tide turned, as I predicted also in the book, there was always going to be a wave of defections and desertions. And it's a very difficult thing to say, and you get accused of being a Taliban sympathizer and all sorts, and that's not true at all. But there are places, and the police chief of Helmand told me this, there are places where the local people preferred the Taliban to the government that we were trying to empower. And all I did was do what I thought was the basics of my job, which is go out with those Afghan security forces and police, see how they actually operate, see how the locals respond to them. And that made the prediction of what we're seeing now happen and the very quick collapse very easy to make.
Ben Anderson, thank you for giving us that context and joining us.
Thank you.